I think that one of the best outcomes of becoming a parent coach or working with a parenting coach or being the child of a parenting coach or being the child of someone who works with a parenting coach is that we develop one of the most precious assets available for meeting modern times, and that is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to feel our feelings within our body, to actually feel sadness and how that feels in our heart or our stomach, or how anger makes our face hot, and to be able to express that emotion without causing harm to ourselves or others. Children learn how to deal with emotions from the way that we deal with emotions. They learn to communicate in conflict through the way that we communicate in conflict. And as you're going to hear in today's parent coaching session, the work is not done just because our kids are 12 or 15 or 18. Teenagers also are still children. They're like baby grown-ups. They still have growing brains, and it can be easy to forget this. So today you're going to hear from one of our amazing graduates, Michelle Tovar, who has a 17-year-old son who is really struggling to communicate in the way that meets this family's values. You're going to discover a way to shift the frame of those times when our children treat us worse than they would treat anybody else in the whole world, and see it through a whole new perspective. I loved having this conversation. Stick around for the end with Alan because we really unpack some of these myths about how teenagers should behave or how we should respond when they lash out at us or are rude or disrespectful. And I'm using air quotes if you're listening to the audio only version of this podcast. And if you're looking for more support in this area, I highly recommend that you go grab our 5-part peaceful parenting course. It's totally free. And you can grab that at giinstituteforparenting.com/peace. Enjoy today's session.
So I have three sons. My oldest son is 17. He's a junior. And I'm entering this kind of phase of my parenting where the letting go is happening. We're college touring. He's gonna be 18 this year. And so I see that he's shifting into this adult, a young adulthood, which I'm very proud of him, and I love him dearly. So I do feel a little bit of not as intense as grief, but similar to grief, of seeing this phase of his childhood kind of phase out. Um, and then I'm also, in this being intentional to just start letting go a little bit more, and letting him kind of through natural kind of choices figure things out. He's a very hyper focused, determined young man, who sets very high expectations and goals for himself. And then we, of course, support him along the way. But what's kind of been happening is, he sets these goals and we support him, or we provide, financially what he needs or emotionally what he needs. But because he's so busy, because um, he's got so much going on. It's his junior year. He works as a ref. He's on the varsity soccer team. He's in AP class, like all the things. As a mom, I see him not always making the best choices when it comes to getting enough rest and eating properly. And so the fatigue of that is where we kind of receive the brunt of his kind of letting letting it out, the stress, and so sometimes that can come out in very nasty ways. Now, I'm pretty well versed on adolescence and what's going on in his brain, and having compassion for that, but it does, cause dysregulation for me at times, especially when I'm under resourced. And so I'm just navigating this, uncharted waters right now. Hopefully, the second and third child, I'll have a little more experience. But, I do provide him redos. I do encourage him to talk with a less aggressive tone or choose different words. I try to give him those opportunities. And thankfully, we have an open relationship where we can take a little break, calm down, come back to it, come up with solutions moving forward. But I guess ultimately, I kind of feel like my time's running out. Did I do enough? Is he ready for the world? Is the way he's sometimes treating me a reflection of the way he's going to treat future partners? Probably not. I know that logically, but in the moment, so I guess my intention would be to kind of um, continue building this new muscle moving forward in this phase of my parenting with him, so that you know my needs and his needs are kind of respected mutually. um, and we're very proud of him, and we're you know really excited about his future, even though part of him like, oh, my little boy.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of it's an interesting stage. Very interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So if I can kind of capture there, I hear a few different things that you're sharing, and we might be able to zone in on just one of those together today. And I hear one element is that you can see that his current lifestyle is pretty fast paced, pretty intense. And you can see this accumulation of, you know, maybe less than ideal sleep habits or eating habits that also contribute to his general level of stress, and that he is living a lifestyle today that does hold a lot of stress in his experience. And then what you're seeing is sometimes the way he responds to things, it's coming from that stress that
Mhm.
he is like, yeah, he's having big responses that are triggering for you, and you can see that it's coming from the stress that he's under today. And all of that makes sense. It doesn't make it easy, but it does make sense. And so that's the other piece that I hear, that it's not easy for you to be in those moments, because then you feel like you're kind of wrapped into that as well. And it's hard for you to, maintain what you know is possible for your best parenting. And you named a lot of different things that really are setting him up for success. And then you also named, like, he's your oldest. He's at a pretty pivotal stage of his life, junior in high school, looking ahead to the future. And I think these are my words, not yours, but it sounds like the clock is ticking. Like the time with you under your roof, like day to day with you, is potentially wrapping up, and it's going to be looking different going ahead. And so that is also stirring up some things in your own internal experience. So did I kind of capture, I think, three big pieces there? Or did I
Yeah.
miss anything?
No, definitely. You definitely captured it. Um, yeah, to the point.
Okay, so I mean, I wish I could say we could address all three of those right now. I don't think we'd be able to do them all justice if we tried to get to all of them. So when you hear me recap those three different pieces, is there one that really like stands out as like most urgent, or even like most tender, that like, ooh, if we could look at that more closely, that would be really beneficial?
I would say probably his bigger responses,
Mm,
his impulsive responses that I know genuinely aren't a reflection of him and who he is, but
yeah.
sometimes they're nasty and sometimes it's, a little
Yeah.
bit of an asshole. I'll be quite frank. And
Yeah, I get it.
that and being the only female in the house, my brain kind of goes to like, there's other siblings, and if they're hearing it, and like this is not what I want. for him.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're seeing these big behaviors, this nastiness, this being an asshole that doesn't represent who he is. And it still taps into a fear of are his little brothers going to pick up on this? Is he going to treat other people this way? This is not how I'm parenting him and not what I want for his future. So yeah, let's go there. And to go there, I'd love if you could kind of paint the picture and give me all as many details as possible, maybe around one experience. Like what did it look like? What did it sound like in one of these like heated moments? What's his version of nasty? What is that like?
Okay. So Friday night, end of the week, long week, everybody at Friday night is like done, right? I totally get that. But going back to one of the things we are helping him with his goal setting was he really wants to kind of lock in his ACT score this year and like just kind of have that pressure off, which I think is a great goal. And it's something he set when we all sat down and talked about our intentions in 2024. Um, so we talked about providing a little bit of tutoring, specifically with some of the math skills he hasn't seen since middle school. So like a refresher thing. Um, so he's been going. Obviously, that was a financial, commitment for us, and something we wanted him to be on board, right? Um, and and he said absolutely. So I've kind of backed off. I gave him the schedule. He was aware of when and the times and all of that. So leading up to Saturday's session, he had like some tests he needed to do beforehand. Um, and all we did was like, okay, just remember that session is, just a friendly reminder, like earlier in the week. Well, he chose to let the week pass.
Mm.
Now it's Friday night. He wants to go see his girlfriend or hang out, whatever. And he has all this other homework he has to do. Mind you, his weekend's packed. Um, so he kind of came over to me and he said, "Hey, the tutor said that I don't really have to do the test because then he won't have anything for me to do with him in the tutoring session." And I was like, "Really? A tutoring place does not have any, information for you to do?" And so I was like, just a reminder, you had all week. So it seems like tonight's going to be the night that you have to do it in order to have it before Saturday." So he kind of mumbled something as he turned around under his breath, but enough to where I could hear it. And so when you know, I asked him, "Why did you say that?" And then he kind of went off. And I think that was the release for him to feel the reality of the stress of what he chose to kind of, you make your bed, you got to sleep in it kind of situation. This is my reality.
Yeah.
Um, he had to spend lots of hours on a Friday night doing all the things.
Yeah.
But that response to me was what really triggered my dysregulation.
Yeah, so the way like he mumbled under his breath something just loud enough that he knew you would hear it and he knew you wouldn't like it. And that was his signal of what do you think that was? Maybe beyond frustration. Like clearly he was frustrated that now he's got to do this instead of whatever social plans he had for Friday night. But I wonder if you could put yourself in his shoes, what else was underneath that, like under the breath comment? Like what was he really launching with that?
Well, I know he was tired. I know he had an injury from the game the night prior. I'm sure he was starving because it was after school. My kids are always starving. I think emotionally, it's a lot. Like it's a lot. This extra layer is a lot on top of everything else, and we knew that these 5 weeks were going to be a lot, and we talked about that with him and in making that commitment moving forward. but I think the reality of it like really sunk in for him and
Yeah.
the sacrifices that he was going to need to do. And he was sad about that.
Yeah, I'm wondering because he's 17 years old. Can you time travel back to when he was like 4 and 5 years old? And if he didn't get his way, does this behavior kind of is it at all reminiscent of like how he might have acted when he was 4 and 5 and he didn't get his way?
Um, I don't think he would have said anything like nasty at that time. But his actions might have showed frustration or, like maybe he threw a car or like threw something or,
Yeah.
somewhat of a tantrum.
Yeah. The reason I ask that is because in that moment, like you said, his reality is like hitting him, smacking him in the face, hitting really hard. In that moment, he's not his optimal version of his 17-year-old self anymore.
Right.
And yeah, it's like he's having a 17-year-old tantrum. And so instead of like throwing his backpack at you, which he might have done if he was 4 or 5, now he's going to throw this nasty comment right at you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
That's
doesn't feel good.
no, it doesn't feel good. And part of me is like, you know, I mean, he's huge. He's almost 6'2". He's like, sometimes I'm like, you're like this man already, but you really aren't totally there.
Right.
So got some stretching to do in here.
Yeah.
Um, which those impulse kind of reactions definitely confirm that. Um, and I know that logically, right? Like I know that. Um, but in the heat of the moment, my brain is like, how can you talk to your mom like that?
Yeah. So I want to pause here and just kind of tease apart what is kind of happening, what I see happening in that moment where he makes that nasty comment. There's a part of your brain that is like, I get it. He's hungry. It's right after school. Teenage boys are also always hungry. He had an injury last night. It's the end of the week. He's just now like really figuring out and seeing that his plans are changing and he's got to fulfill this commitment, follow through on this responsibility, and he doesn't want to. So, like, your rational brain gets all of that, and then a different part of you is like, that is not how you talk to your mother. and
Right.
and so it's like his like part of him is on fire because of all those different things. And then he makes that comment, and now you're also on fire.
Mhm.
And like, where's the fire hose? Who's gonna like help put this out? Does that kind of represent that moment when you see him huffing like and walking away and you're just left there like, oh, really? Does that kind of match your experience?
Yeah. Yeah. And usually we've talked to him about situations like this before and made a plan when we're both calm to like access that break. So that's something we do. Like we need a break.
Yeah,
And what helps him is for me to say the time, like 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Like he needs to
specific.
know the time. He doesn't want to feel like, we're just pushing him to the side. He wants to know this is an actual break and this is the time that I
Yeah.
need and we'll come back. Um, at that moment I didn't say that because he was kind of walking out already. And so I took my break. So I'm like, I'm taking that as a break because I don't
Yeah.
want to react.
Yeah.
But inside it's hard not to take it personal. It's not hard to think, is this a reflection because I'm a female? Is this a reflection of, but I think as you were saying, it's totally not related to me at all. It's just his little explosion. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm so like excited. It sounds weird when I say I'm excited as you're sharing your struggle. I'm excited for this opportunity for to support your system, like you said, to not take it personally. For some reason, like this is tapping like into a really tender place, and he's not trying to hurt you. What I'm guessing is that he's feeling his like disappointment, frustration, and all of that. And like our systems are really unfortunately wired to just like drag somebody in if we're not feeling good. And so he's like, well, mom's right there. I'm not feeling good. I can do something so she doesn't feel good either. And then we're matching. And it's just part of our like survival wiring to like find something that matches, even when it's painful. And so one thing that I've heard from Brene Brown, and it falls into what Dan Siegel calls like creating objectivity, is to help separate his action from how it's landing with you by using this phrase, I'm telling myself a story that, and so like you said, like I'm telling myself a story that he's going to treat all women this way.
Mm.
And just, like, letting yourself hear that in a different lens, like, "Wait a second, is that story true?
Right. Right.
Or what's happening here?" So when you hear me say those words, what what stirs up or what opens up?
I think I think it's really true. It's just a narrative. It's a thought that I'm grabbing onto. It's not a fact, right? Like he treats me amazingly as his son. He treats his girlfriend and his grandmother and his aunts and his cousins that are females like beautifully. So I know that that's just a story. Um, but it's just kind of training my brain not to grab onto that, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, because there's like, I'm guessing that underneath that story, like, when anyone says, "What if?" Like, what if he treats a future partner that way? I hear that coming from some fear, like fear about the future, like fear of this becoming a pattern. And does that resonate with you when I name that like underlying voice as coming from fear?
Yeah, I think it goes back to one of the other threads of like time is kind of coming
Mm.
to the end. Like, did I do enough? Is this
Yeah.
you ready? And I think that's more of, I guess that's more on me. Um, and that grieving process of, feeling like I did do enough. Like he's ready. Like it's gonna be bumpy. He's gonna figure things out. But we are his safety net if he needs to lean back on us. But just feeling what I did is enough.
Yeah. I hear you say that's on me. And what I also hear is I love him so much that I just want to know that I've done everything I could.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you hold your parenting responsibility very dearly. Like,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, like, that makes so much sense that that fear would come swooping in because, again, you're kind of up against a clock and how he shows up in the world. Ooh, let me insert that tool that I just mentioned. Are you telling yourself a story that how he shows up in the world is a reflection of who you are as a mom?
Mm, yeah, maybe. Maybe. I mean, my husband and I are the leaders, right? We're in our home, and I know he's a separate person. Like even though we have the same DNA and live in the same home, and he's got those mirror neurons through the years that we've modeled different things for him. But at the end of the day, he's his own person.
Yeah.
Um, and the choices he's going to make in adulthood, the good, bad, the in between choices are really on him. And I
Yeah.
just need to trust that we did do enough.
So, yeah, I hear you completely. And I think there's opportunity to not just have sort of an unfounded trust, but to actually gather evidence for, how for gauging, the success of your parenting and the success of your relationship. Just like the fear is seeing his comment as evidence that, oh, things aren't going well. You can also find evidence to support that trust. Like, yes, I have put a lot into raising my son a certain way to live into our values. And I think I can find evidence there too. So now I want to go to like the aftermath. What happens like in that same scenario Friday night? So, he faces the reality, he's got to do this homework and he, mutters that nasty comment as he heads out the door. Then what? You've taken your break and you've
Mhm.
kind of come back to your center. What is your next, communication like with him?
So he went upstairs and was doing work. And my husband and I went and picked up some food, and messaged him. So he knew food was coming. We got him a pretty good bowl of lots of food because,
Nice.
I mean, food is important
Yeah.
to boys. Then we all sat down and ate. And there wasn't a lot of conversation at that point. I think he was just still coming down. We were coming down. We were all eating. Food helps. Um, then he went back upstairs for, I would say, about 3.5 more hours. Then he came down and he came into the bedroom and he said, "I'm all done." And we said, "Okay. How are you feeling?" He's like, "It was a lot. It was a lot." Um, because he had other things to do as well. And we're like, "Okay." And then we talked a little bit about the response. My husband specifically, um, very firmly expressed to him that he may not talk to me that way, that it's not acceptable. Um, and he understood and he apologized and he said, I take ownership for this. I should have, I should have not, I should have just walked away and not said anything. I was just very stressed. And so we talked about, encouraging him. It's only a few more weeks. We understand how hard it is, but kind of maybe look beyond this and hopefully you getting to that goal that you want. Um, and just kind of, holding tight in the meantime. And also maybe looking at your week and planning things out a little bit better. And if you need help, we're here to do that for you.
Yeah.
Um, and then the next day he went to the tutoring session and he said he felt good about it. Um, and and then he continued with the weekend. So I think it was good. It was a good repair in the sense of giving him that space and us taking our space to really kind of process everything and then
Yeah.
coming back together when he was ready
Yeah.
um, to follow up.
Yes, I loved hearing that, you know, the impact of his comment was named, like, and I hear that your husband named it as, that's outside our values, like, those are my words, but it's like, that's not how we talk to each other, and so he's letting your son know, "You've made a mistake." And I'm wondering if your son also sees the impact that his words had on you. That in addition to making a mistake according to our family values, we don't talk that way to each other. That he also gets that the words he said to you hurt you
Yeah.
when you received them. Do you think he also perceives that impact that his actions had on you?
I do and I don't. I think sometimes he's made comments like, "Oh, you're so soft." I'm the female, the soft one. So I think his male testosterone energy, locker room, like the way
Mhm.
they talk to each other, like that's his norm, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think it's hard for him, like that self compassion, that reasoning, that part of his brain's not totally there of just seeing the experience of another person.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it's fully developed yet. But I think he can empathize with how I'm feeling and what I'm needing. Um, I don't know if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah, it does. And the reason I asked is because here I think is where the part that's feeling so afraid about like, what if, like, is he gonna like treat everyone like this or treat other, women like this in the future? That these moments of repair and reconnection and where they're coming from his perspective can be that evidence of like we're humans. We're going to have these moments where we say or do or don't do things that we didn't want to, that we regret. And when we see the impact, we know we can come back and offer that repair. And it doesn't make it all better, but it brings us back to each other with understanding and empathy. And that, so then it's not about, oh my gosh, is he going to never like do this with somebody else? But it's more about when this happens again, is he going to see it and be able to take like a positive action in response to it? So I think that might be the reflective question. And like you said, he's a junior, so he's still got another year.
yeah.
So maybe that can be the reflective piece for you going forward of, okay, there's this piece. I've done so much. I've built this really strong foundation. And I think I wonder if you felt assured, like, let's jump forward a year from now. He's like about to graduate high school and go off to college. If you had seen him initiate like repair without as much prompting or, just self-initiating repair, recognizing that his actions had an impact, how would you feel about him going out into the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we try to normalize in my home is, like we all have flaws or things we're working on, right? And we acknowledge them, and we apologize when we need to. We talk about it, and then we try to move forward with, intention to work on that. And I do see that in him now. Because he'll be like, "Oh, I need to work on that." So I hope in a year from now, there's more self-awareness.
There were a few concepts that you brought up in this coaching session that I would love to unpack a little bit for our listeners. Let's start with this concept of survival programming. Um, for most of us, it's so entrenched, right? Like our survival instinct lives in the deepest, most ancient part of our brain, and we believe it.
Right.
But I would love for you to kind of teach a little bit about what survival programming is and how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea that our brains, our nervous systems, their first job is to constantly check for danger or safety. And the interesting thing about being a human is that we have evolved from the very real dangers of large animals chasing us to perceived dangers of someone yelling at us or a homework project that's weighing on us. And so, even though those things that are stressors are not actually going to threaten our survival, we interpret and our systems interpret those stressors as if they are a threat to our survival, which takes us away from our full capacity of cognition and executive functioning and clear decision making and choice of our words, thoughts, and actions. And so if we are not aware of when we're getting understandably pulled to this kind of survival space, that's when we end up doing things that we later regret. And we miss opportunities to find ways to bring ourselves up and out a little bit more from that survival mode to gain more access to the rest of our brain that is going to help us interact, especially helping us interact with other people in our relationships. So I hope
Yeah.
that helps.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? Like in our own, if we were just like by ourselves in our own room and we're lashing out and freaking out, that's not fun. But when you have two people together and that dynamic is intertwined and entangled, and you've got, one survival instinct up against another survival instinct, nothing positive is going to come from that interaction. And I think as parents, that bar is even higher because it is our right relationship to be the stable, rooted, grounded anchor to receive that from our children rather than meeting them in it.
Oh, yes. And it's kind of a double, there's like many things going on, because on one part of it is we don't want to allow ourselves to get pulled into their survival mode. We want to stay steady. And it's so that is that we can respond in the best way possible to support them and not just get pulled into the whole big mess. And another angle is that, especially with very young children in their development, they are learning how to grow their capacity to handle stressors from what we as the parent have in our own capacity. And
Mhm.
so it's a very interconnected relationship of responding or reacting, but also increasing capacity in our children.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we model these behaviors so that hopefully over time they learn that they do not have to fly off the handle simply because they have that impulse or drive, right? That there is what's that Viktor Frankl quote? Between stimulus and reaction, there is a pause. And in that pause lies our freedom. And so that's one of the muscles that we build here with our clients is the ability to insert the pause between the stimulus of our child speaking to us harshly, disrespectfully, with an edge, aggressively, and how we are going to meet that child in that moment. Changes everything.
Yeah. And it's hard. There are a lot of reasons why that is so hard. And it's in that space of why it's hard that coaching really supports parents. It's not, we can't force ourselves to make that happen. If we
Yeah.
could, we would. Yeah,
Totally.
we need help to see what's getting in the way of having that be our reality. So, yeah.
Michelle is a very experienced parent coach, graduate of the Jai Institute, and so obviously has quite a lot of education and practice in supporting other people in this work. So she talked about knowing what's happening in teenagers' brains. I think a lot of people don't know that we think teenagers are adults in not quite mature bodies, but that's not actually the case. So, can you give us maybe like a 90-second primer on the teenage brain?
Yeah, the teenage brain is a very busy and honestly kind of neurologically messy place, because part of the growth and development in the teenage years is pruning and letting go of things that aren't necessary anymore. And that process is tremendously valuable. It creates more efficiency in the brain, but while that process is happening, it's almost like you might see things that seem like a regression, where why can't my teenager remember where he left the car keys? Why can't my teenager see the clock and know how much more time is left to get out the door? It's like things that used to seem simple, they were independent and it was easy, now seem to be more of a struggle. And it's just that their brain is in this very active, very complicated process of its own evolution, which is natural and it's meant to happen and it's going to lead to great outcomes. And while it's happening, it can get a little tricky, a little sticky. and seem like things are going backwards, but they're not. It's just, it is a phase, it is a stage, and they will come through it. But being able to understand that that might be what's happening. It's not a personality problem. It's not a, I'm trying to make life difficult problem. It's just their brain is in a very different place.
Yeah. The other thing that's happening at this time is individuation, which can be so challenging, especially for passionate, committed parents. Like parenting is the thing that matters most. And that push, pull leads to conflict. It is normal, especially when we're under the pressure cooker of school and college applications. Sounds like this is a, high achieving kid who's got big aspirations for where he's going in the world. Michelle brought up this concept of trust. And for me, from my purview as the founder of Jai, what I always want people to know is that trust is like when our kids dump on us. I know it doesn't feel good. I know it's not a pleasant experience, but in a way, it is demonstrating how much they trust us. Because I'm guessing that Michelle's son is not out in the world unloading on everyone else. And that can feel unfair as a parent, right? Like, I do everything for you. I became a parent coach for you. I did all this work and have organized my life to meet your needs. And I get all the, like, what
Right.
the heck? How do we like, it's such a tricky one, right, Alan?
It is. And what I'm hearing is that, like, I used to teach preschool and toddlers, and parents of children of that age had the exact same issue. Like, I get, like, quote unquote, the worst, like, from my kid, but then I get these great reports from their teachers and their babysitters and aunts and uncles. Like, come on. And what I'm hearing is that that trust and that space for a child of any age to be able to be completely vulnerable and authentic, even when they are at their worst with their parents, is a gift. And
Mm,
that's really hard. But if you're able, if your child is able to show you all of their sides, even the ones that they wouldn't show anywhere else, that means that something really powerful is in place. So
this is
it's,
kind of a, sorry to jumped in. I was just reminded of an analogy that I often use for this, and it's kind of gross, so forgive me. But when our children are physically ill, right, we hold the bucket for them. We hold their hair back. We've got, the container. We wipe their mouth after.
yeah,
And it's the same with an emotional release, right? Like if we can think about it, oh, I'm just going to hold the emotional vomit bucket here, and it's not personal, and it's not an attack on me. Um, and then coming back to it later, which we'll circle back to in just a second, I think that helps me as a parent, like remember my role, which is to provide safe care
yeah,
for my child, even when they're, they've got the fever or they're throwing up or they just need a big emotional
yeah,
vomit.
yeah. The release, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And and I think the silver lining might be that when parents can accept that part of their role as a parent and see that that is offering benefit to their child, the way that a parent can receive all of that and hold themselves steady and like maintain that connection through the hardest of whatever their child is bringing to them, that helps their child then go back out in the world and have more resilience and have more of that inner self-esteem and have all of that inner resourcing that they rely on when the parent is not around. So
Mm,
thank goodness
yeah.
that we as parents can do this really hard messy work, because that's what is helping our children like be able to show up in their best way in other places.
the final piece I want to talk about from this session, you had asked Michelle, is he aware, right? Is he aware of how his tone and words and reactivity impacted you? And this is actually a place where I find that parents don't give their kids enough credit, right? And we kind of like hold that in and create a whole story about it. Like you said, kind of fear project into the future. They're going to be a misogynist, right? Whatever the fear is that comes up. And, especially with older children, there's so much power, not in the moment, right? We want to wait until the dust has settled, things are calm, we're back to a state of connection. But part of how we teach our children healthy relationship skills is to trust them to share how their actions impacted us, right? It's not burdening them, it's educating them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a beautiful skill that comes from nonviolent communication. It's empathy. And when a parent can empathize with themselves and express their experience so that their child can understand and see their experience, that creates such a bridge of connection. And it does create that learning opportunity. I did this thing, and this is the impact that it had on another person. And so if we shy away from that, we're really missing that teaching opportunity for inviting our children to empathize with another person. And so different ages, that looks different ways. But with a teenager, being able to honestly say, when you responded that way, it really hurt. It did not feel good to me.
Mhm.
And just kind of letting that be, and then the follow-up of here's what I need. Could you give me a hug? Would you be willing to give me a hug? Like, or whatever that might be, to reconnect and to come back together.
It's interesting because Michelle said, he says, "Oh, you're so soft," and there's teaching even from that moment, right? Because that's, again, this is a 17-year-old human, undeveloped brain, not a lot of life experience in relationships. And that's his defense mechanism, right? Of not allowing her experience in, right? Like he's creating a label.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I just, my mama bear kind of came out for Michelle, and I just wanted to lovingly say to this young man, um, and there will be other soft people in your life. And how might you find a way to be more curious about their experience? Because not everyone's going to be like you, my love.
Yeah.
um, we're teachers, right? Like we get to recognize these behavior patterns in our children and gently hold up a mirror for them to see, so that they can hopefully go out into the world and have more fulfilling relationships, lose less friendships, and not cause harm to others because they have their own blind spots.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting when I heard that label, yes, as well, I'm like, "Oh, well, this is a whole nother opportunity." I think there are so many today, all of us are inundated with so many different stories around emotions and who gets to have what emotions and what it means about you if you have certain emotions. And so I yeah, I think that everybody gets to have their emotional experience, and they also get to choose who they're willing to share their emotional experience with. And
Mm.
so, from my point of view, I would love for every child to trust that they can share every emotional experience with their parents. Um, and it may be that for like a 17-year-old boy, it's not okay to show different emotions in different situations. And we can honor that. And if they can find that possibility, that another space where those emotions are safe and valid and held and accepted, that's going to create, yeah, more depth in his experience. So